Welcome to the tutorial for the Hurstpierpoint top. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the equipment that you need and what I've used to make it. So this is my pattern, and I've cut the main body parts and the sleeve out of this lovely fabric that I was gifted by Minerva. This is the code if you feel you'd like to buy some. It's a lovely quality cotton. It's from their core range. And I'd say it's like a sort of like a thick t-shirt rather than a sweatshirt fabric. Let me show you. It's got a sort of loop back terry to the back there. So it's a nice weight. It's cotton, so it'd be nice and breathable. Anyway, so I've cut my main sleeve and main body, the back, the front and the sleeve there, out of this. And then in contrast, because I thought it would show up better on the tutorial for you, I'm using a rib. Now, I've cut the bands, the waistband. Look, you can see how stretchy that is out of this rib, and the neckline, the neck band, and the cuffs. And it's got like a slightly fleecy side and a rib side on that one. So I've got a few examples of the stitches you could use on your regular sewing machine here, your domestic one. This is the type of needle I'm going to use today. It's a Microtex needle. You can get jersey needles which are ballpoint. This one is more of a universal one, and I like this. This is an 80, which I'm using for this fabric, this Minerva fabric, because it's quite lightweight. It's not as heavy as a fleece-backed or a fur-backed sweatshirting. That's my overlock. That's just from my regular overlocking machine. As you can see, the threads don't actually stretch, but that stitch does. The way that it stitches makes it very stretchy. And this stitch is my preferred super stretch stitch, or I call it a lightning stitch, for sewing jersey, because as you can see, it really does stretch with everything when you give it a little pull, look, and it won't break. So that's a really nice combo. That's the one I'd recommend if you have an overlocker. If you don't have an overlocker, your sewing machine will have other options. So you can either just zigzag over the edge, a big zigzag, or this is a double overlock stitch. So that's the equivalent of an overlocking machine, but on your domestic sewing machine. And as you can see, again, it stretches a lot. So that's a really nice option, and it looks very neat. So another stretch stitch, which we're not going to use today, but this one we used to use a lot on the ballet costumes. It's a lycra stitch, but as you can see, it's quite wide, so it's great for putting in elastic and things, but I'm not going to use it to sew up today. And this one again is another favourite, which is they call it a sewn out zigzag in my sewing machine manual, but I used to call it a 3-step zigzag because it's got 3 little stitches, and I've just lengthened that stitch a lot so that it's not as wide. And as you can see, again, look, they all stretch beautifully. Now this little miracle, this is what I'm going to use today. I've never used this before. Can you see how stretchy that is? Let me move it a bit further away. Look how much stretch there is in there. This is a relatively new addition to the home sewing hobby, and this is a Gutermann thread, and it's called Maraflex. Now they've got quite a few colours in the range, so I'm going to use this because you can just use an ordinary stitch. You don't have to change, you don't have to use any of those fancy ones, just use a plain straight stitch. Okay, so let's get started with the sewing. Here are my front piece and my back piece. Cut on the fold. Remember to mark any notches that are appropriate for your size. I use little snips in, but you could use chalk or a pencil. As you can see, they're both cut to the fold, so you've got 2 lovely big pieces, one for the front, one for the back. Now this is the back piece. You can tell because it's got a very little scoop there for the back neck, and this one is the front, and you see it's much more scooped out for the front neck there. So you want to lay these out right sides together. Matching up the raw ridges of your shoulder seams. I'm going to pop some pins in. I know some people really like to use those little clips, the little mini clips, to sew with jersey. but I'm going to be old school and use just a couple of pins to hold it together. So centimetre seam allowance as always on my patterns unless otherwise specified. So we're starting with a little back tack, and remember I'm using that Super Magic Maraflex thread, so I'm using just a straight stitch for mine. All the way to the end and a back tack to finish. There we go, 2 shoulder seams. Let's give that a little pull. Look, you can see it stretches with the fabric, which is lovely. And now I'm going to use my overlooker. So that's where you could use your special fancy stitch on your sewing machine, or your zigzag if you don't have an overlooker. Open these up. I'm going to press the shoulder seams towards the back. Give them a little press. There we go. You can see they're laying nicely now. Next job is to prepare your neckband. As I said before, I'm using some rib here because it's a nice contrast colour. I've got my neckband cut to the fold, and as you can see, I think it's sort of slightly furry hairy on one side and then it's quite plain on the other. It doesn't have an obvious rib, but the furry fluffy side is the wrong side. So right sides together, we're going to stitch across this short edge. A little back tack to start and a little back tack to finish. There we go, that's the seam. So now I'm just going to snip in, with not very sharp scissors, they need sharpening, just in the middle there, and just fold one seam allowance one way and one seam allowance the other way, and then just fold it in half. There we go, so the seam allowances lie neatly. So let's attach this neckband now. This is my front and back sewn together at the shoulders, so that's my neckline in the middle. As you can see, I've marked the centre back, centre front and the quarter marks. So I folded it that way, then I joined them together and did the quarters basically, just to get an approximate notch for my neckband. And I've done the same on my neckband. As you can see, I've got the quarters there. So I've done one pin at the seam allowance, and then I've just folded and folded to get roughly 4 equal lengths. I'm putting the seam allowances all at the centre back, pinning them together on that notch there, and then I'm going to do the centre front, match the notch to the pin, and then I'm going to do the same with the quarters here, match that pin to that notch, and the next one. There we go. So you can put as many or as few pins in or clips as you like. I'm just doing the quarters, and I'm going to just go slowly, matching all those raw edges. I'm going to start at the centre back, stitching again a centimetre seam allowance. Now I've put a few stitches in just to anchor it. Then I'm taking the pins out, and I'm going to stretch now out that neckline, that neckband, so that it fits the actual neckline. And as I go, I'm tucking in seam allowances and just carefully stitching, matching all the raw edges as I go. So just take your time with this bit. And once you're all the way around, finish with a back tack. There we go. So that's our neckband attached. Let's just check there's no puckers in there before we move to the next stage. Oh, lovely stretchy still. Get your head through there. I'm going to use my overlooker to finish this off. There we go. It looks very neat, doesn't it? So I'm going to turn it through, and I'm just going to give it a little steam to help that seam allowance lie nice and flat. There we go. That looks much smarter, doesn't it? So next it's the sleeve insertion. Here we go. These are my sleeves. I've cut one pair. Remember to mark the notches so that you know which is the back sleeve and which is the front sleeve. So I'm going to open them up, grab my main body and I'm going to put the sleeve in this side. So I want not that one, I want the other one. Let's get rid of that one for the minute. That's the single notch. That's the double notch. There we go. So double notches denote the back sleeve. So we want those pieces together. I'm just going to pop a couple of pins in again, just to mark the main points. And this notch matches the shoulder seam. So I'm going to pop a pin in there. And then I'm going to put one at the other end. There we go. So starting from one end, centimetre seam allowance, back tack all the way over the sleeve head. Here we go. So I'm just matching up again those raw edges as I go. The sleeve should fit in beautifully. You shouldn't have to stretch it in or ease it in any way. That's the joy of jersey fabrics. So take your time. There we go. That's all in. There's no puckers or anything. Let's check it looks nice. Yep, that's great. So I'm going to finish these edges off again. It instantly looks neater, doesn't it? And then I'm going to give that another little steam, just to get the seam allowance to lie a bit flatter. There we go, one sleeve in. So now we're going to stitch the underarm and side seam in one. So there's my neckline and my sleeves are in. So I'm going to flip this over so it's right sides together. There we go. I'm going to match it up at the cuff first, pop a pin in, and then I want these underarm seams to match so that that looks all nice when it's turned through, and then again just a couple of pins down the side seam just to hold them together while you're sewing. So starting at the cuff, I'm going to stitch all the way down under the arm, down the side seam. There we go. And I'm going to finish this edge off again with my overlocker. There we go, job done. This is coming together very quickly, isn't it? Quick steam. Okay, so next is cuffs. We've got a pair of cuffs here. Let's unpin. Again, I've used my ribbing. So that's the fold line in the middle there. So they fold that way. So here we go, we've got two there, so they'll fold like that. So they'll be the same depth as your hip band when they're finished. This is the right side, so I want to sew right sides together along the short edge again. Centimetre seam allowance. Let's go, there we are. That looks great. So fold in half and put the little snip in again so that you can do your little fancy trick with the seam allowance. There we go, one way, one the other way, and fold it inside the cuff. There we go, match those seams and the raw edges. Get them nicely lined up. So I'm going to pop a pin in to hold those seams together, and I'm going to also do a halfway mark there. It's only a tiny cuff, but it just helps to distribute. Okay, so we're going to pop these cuffs on. Now I've marked my half sleeve, the top notch, so I'm going to match these seam allowances. Got my underarm seam on my sweatshirt sleeve, and then I've got the seam on my cuff which are going together. And then where I'd marked halfway on the cuff is going to match where I've marked halfway on the sleeve. Like I say, they're only small, but it does just help to distribute it a bit more evenly if you've got a halfway mark. So let's pin those together. A little bit fiddly because it's a tiny hole. There we go. So again, a centimetre seam allowance. Put as many pins in as you feel you need at this point if you're finding this fiddly. Now I stitch always from the inside, but when you've got a domestic sewing machine you can use the sort of free arm. But obviously I'm used to using industrial machines which only have the flatbed, so I always do it from the inside. So I'm just stretching this fullness in the sleeve out a little bit so it's stretched to fit. There we go, that's nice. Let's check there's no puckers. That's looking really nice. I like that contrast ribbing. I think that looks very smart. And let's finish off this seam allowance here. There we go. That's one cuff. So next it's prepping the hip band. Now I've used super duper wide ribbing for mine, so mine's in one piece, but unless you're a size 8 or 10 you'll probably have to cut 2 of these, so you'll have 2 seams rather than to the fold. If you've used your fabric that you've used for the bodice, you'll be able to get one out in the fold. So I've got my furry side on the inside and I'm doing right sides together, matching the short edges and sewing down a centimetre. Again, you will have 2 seams on yours if you've chosen the ribbing option rather than the self fabric option for the hip band. I'm going to snip as I have before, and I'm going to just wiggle those seams in opposite directions again. So you'll need to do this on both seams if you're using your ribbing rather than your self fabric, because you'll have a seam at either side that you'll match to your side seams. There we go. And I'm going to sort of wiggle it around. I've found the other half there. That will be your other seam. Get these raw edges all together, and then I want to do the quarter marks. Because it's quite a long length, you definitely want your quarter marks for your hip band so that it's nice and evenly distributed. Okay, that's the prep. So now all that's left is to attach this hip band. So here we are, this is my top. You can see I've marked the centre fronts and centre backs again on my top, and I've got right sides together, and again this is my seam in my ribbing. You'll have 2 seams, so you'll match seam to seam, side seam to ribbing seam. Pin those first. So there's my other side seam, so that will go to your other ribbing seam. And then I'm going to do, there's my centre front, match that to my quarter mark on my ribbing, and there's my centre back, which I'll match to the other quarter mark on my ribbing. At this point, again, if you're a noob, you'll definitely want to put more pins or clips in or whatever to get this to distribute nice and evenly. So I'm going to just stitch around again, centimetre seam allowance. Look, you can see it's much more wiggly where it's had a lot more stretch facilitated, and I'm going to overlock, and then all that's left is to give it a little steam. So here we go, we've got a neckband, we've got our sleeves in, we've got our cuffs on, and we've got our hip band on. So hopefully you've got something that looks very much like this. Enjoy.